Hello, and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 90, Thursday, May 25th, 2023.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and...
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined, as always, by the nibs to my toodles, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hello, Courtney, and welcome, listeners. We are going to kick off our summer series by traveling to the second star to the right and straight on till morning.
Yes, it is an annual tradition on our show to celebrate summer reading and focus on a theme for 3 to 4 months. We kicked things off in 2019 by reading the 7 original Kingdom Keepers books. The next summer, we highlighted classic literature covered by Disney films in our summer cinema series. In 2021, we got a little spooky with Tales from the Haunted Mansion Sinister Summer series. And last year, you, our listeners, picked our legendary summer series of Disney Legend memoirs. This summer, it is a British invasion. We are focusing on classic British literature that inspired Disney animated films. So stay tuned at the end of the episode for our June, July, and August selections. But joining us for our first selection, May, Peter Pan, is longtime listener and second-time Book of the Mouse Club guest, Leeann Sausser. Leeann joined us on episode 65 to discuss Meg Cabot's Princess Diaries. Like me and Emily, Leeann is a former Disney College program participant. We first met during her fall 2016 program, connecting over our shared experience as English majors. She continues to make magic today at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and we are so pleased to have her back. Welcome, Leeann.
Thank you so much, Courtney and Emily. I'm so happy to be back.
We're happy to have you back, and we get to talk more about books. So what our listeners don't know is the three of us have a very extensive group chat about what we read and our Book of the Month picks. But we're going back to classics like we did in our summer cinema series. We went to classics, but now we're doing the British invasion. And I love reading classics, but so I kind of want to kick off our conversation today about how you both feel about classics. We're all avid fiction readers. But what is it like to go to what's considered a, quote, classic?
Yeah, I would not consider myself a classic reader outside of this podcast. Emily, I'm sure you'll touch on your own quest regarding classics, but I appreciate that doing this podcast now for almost 5 years, it'll be 5 years next month, I believe, has gotten me in touch with a lot of the classics that I had never read outside of really what was assigned to me in school, whether that was in high school or in my undergraduate career. So it's been enjoyable for me to read these, to see the inspirations, especially behind Disney films when we do something like this. What about you, Leeann?
Yeah, so I've read classics, honestly, for most of my life, which sounds dramatic, but as a kid, I read all the time and got to a higher reading level than books were necessarily at age-appropriate levels. So classics were a good option for me. So I could read things like, Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella, those classic tales. They were much darker than I think my parents realized they were. But they were my first introduction. And then I did major in English in college. And so that introduced me to a lot of classics, both of these more like Peter Pan, younger type classics, but also things like Pride and Prejudice, The Great Gatsby, those famous books we see on special bookshelves at like Barnes and Nobles or even your local bookstore that have thousands of versions, lots of different covers. So I've read quite a few, but I will say recently that they're not what I turn to. I'm not necessarily looking for classics these days.
So I have to agree, at least recently, I'm not desperately going for classics, but I did go through a phase in that bridge from high school to college, I think it was my AP Lit class that kind of got me into reading more classics. I, like many other female identifying readers, Jane Austen just hooked me in. I've read Pride and Prejudice 3 times. I wrote a paper on it. I loved it. And I kind of got into this thing where I was like, well, what other classics are there? And I have, you can see it behind me. One of my whole shelves is just all Barnes & Noble classics. And I love the Barnes & Noble classic publishing of them because I can't buy all of the Penguin classics that I want to buy without breaking my bank. And I really like their style. They're all the same height. They come with extra stuff. So I went through this whole phase of buying classics. They're also incredibly affordable. So like if you need a book on a budget, classics are great. But yeah, I've definitely grown in other things that I've read. But when I reach for a classic, I won't lie, the expectation's kind of high. If you're calling it a classic, I'm really hoping, and maybe this sometimes sets me up for failure, that I'm going to love it for some reason, because if the whole entire literary world has loved it, I feel like I should come out of this loving it. And sometimes that's a little challenging. I'm not every, like any book, not every classic is for everybody. But actually walking through Barnes & Noble today, they had all their summer books are coming out. It's the best part of Barnes & Noble, summer reading, where they have all the tables of just things pulled out. It's a lot easier to look through. And they had a quote up: "A classic is a book that has never finished saying what it has to say." And I thought that was really interesting and a good summary of, I think, of what classics are and why we do go back to them and why they become the basis for movies and other spin-offs like Peter Pan.
Yeah, I like that quote a lot, and I would certainly say that Peter Pan has not finished saying what it has to say. Emily, I know you've done some extensive research into the background of our author and our text itself, so would you care to share that with everyone?
Absolutely. So before I start, always want to give credit to my sources for background and on our author and book. So I predominantly used the Encyclopedia Britannica online, as well as Playbill had a lot written about Peter Pan because of the musical in the 1950s. They had a whole article about its origins. And then I also used my favorites. The Barnes & Noble Classics editions have introductions, timelines, and actually a lot of information, context at the beginning of each book. So I used that as well. All right, here we go. So James Matthew Barrie was born in May of 1860 in Scotland, and he will pass in 1937, so he lived to be 77 years old. He studied at the University of Edinburgh, where he earned a Master of Arts degree in English literature and spent a couple years first as a journalist at the Nottingham Journal before he becomes a freelance writer in London in 1885. Within 6 years, he publishes 4 books, which is very ambitious. His first, Old Licht Idyllis, and When a Man is Single, was in 1888, Window and Thermes in 1889, The Little Minister in 1891. And when The Little Minister was successfully dramatized for the stage in 1897, he continues to more predominantly start writing for the theater, which will be important for Peter Pan. His first commercial theater success was in 1892 with Walker London, and soon after he married an actress from the play, Mary Ansell, in 1894. But it was childless and speculated to be an unconsummated marriage. They were pretty distant, very formal even for Victorian England. And the relationship that people are probably most familiar with, probably thanks to the film Finding Neverland with Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet, was Barrie's relationship with the Davies family, who served as the inspiration for Peter Pan. So Barrie met the Davies children, George and Jack, in 1897 in Kensington Garden while they were walking their St. Bernard, which is where Nana comes from. Later in the year, he would meet their mother, Sylvia Llewellyn Davies, at a New Year's Eve party. She was the daughter of the writer George du Maurier, a favorite of Barrie's. So that connection immediately, he loved his work. He got along with her kids. They all became inseparable. Barrie is going to help provide for the family financially when Mr. Davies would pass away from cancer in 1907. And the family continued to grow over time to 5 children with the additions of Peter, Michael, and Nicholas. There were some speculations of impropriety between Barrie and Sylvia, but Barrie's personal associates, scholars, and the Davies children themselves discredit these assumptions about a sexual relationship. The youngest Davies child, Nicholas, even went as far to say that he believed Barrie to be asexual. Barrie's considered one of the family, and the children called him Uncle Jim, and it was experiencing childhood through the eyes of the Davies children that would serve as the inspiration for Peter Pan. Peter Pan first appeared in Barrie's 1904 novel, The Little White Bird, which describes Peter's life as a baby before Neverland. It's about 6 chapters of that story has Peter in it. Shortly after, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, was brought to the Duke of York Theatre on December 27, 1904. Sylvia's brother Gerald was the originator of the play, playing simultaneous roles of both Father and Captain Hook. So this was interesting because a lot of people read into this like, oh, there's these parallels between Father and Captain Hook. They're supposed to be the same character, kind of like how we see Hamilton with dual characters from the same actor. It's credited that because Father is in so little of the play, they didn't want to hire multiple actors. So it was to get the most use out of one actor. So that's why it started with one actor playing 2 roles, simply because they could give him more lines. But it ended up having a lot of symbolism. So Barrie's concept of Peter Pan is what fascinated audiences and made Barrie the literary figure that we know today. The play was an instant hit with both adult and child audiences, and he continued to revise the script up until about 1928. So we do get a lot of different endings, and sometimes you can see on stage a couple different variations, small variations, but that's from all of his different revisions. During the final showing of the play in 1908, before it left the Duke of York Theatre, Barrie added an epilogue called, quote, When Wendy Grew Up, an Afterthought, which earned such an ovation that he took a rare bow at curtain call. Though the ending was only performed once in his entire lifetime, the epilogue is now seen as an integral part of the Peter Pan story and is in the version that we read for this podcast. 2 years after the show was first produced, Barrie extracted the chapters about Peter Pan in The Little White Bird, and in 1906 published them in Peter and Kensington Garden. It is in this story that pixie dust is then added for the requirement of flying to keep children from thinking they can simply think happy thoughts and then jump off a ledge. Then in 1911, the story was expanded into the novel Peter and Wendy, which today simply goes by Peter Pan, and that is the version of the story most widely read and the subject of our discussion today. Just to wrap up a little bit about him, in the middle of Peter's theatrical and literary successes, Barrie divorced his wife Mary in 1909, and in 1910 he would adopt all 5 of the Davies children when Sylvia died of cancer. In his lifetime, Barrie continued to publish novels and write plays with varying success. He was granted the title of Baronet in 1913 and the Order of Merit in 1922, and before his death, Barrie granted the rights to Peter Pan, all the Peter Pan works, to the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London, which continues to benefit from them today. So that's a short background. I know that doesn't sound like that was short, but that was the short background condensed that I could give here. And I thought it was important to bring in the Davies children, reference what maybe some people know from Finding Neverland, because that is the inspiration for this story. And I just want to kick us off here before we get into the book. What is everyone's experience with the original source material?
This was my first time reading it, so that was exciting. I've certainly been aware of it, I would say mostly due to the Disney film, watching that on VHS often as a child. It's songs within the Disney sing-along song VHS pantheon, but also I'm going to tip my hand already to my additional resource, the 1960 Mary Martin musical that my grandma had on VHS when I was little. So I recognized that this story wasn't solely a Disney story only. There were other adaptations, but my exposure to it has only been on film.
So I actually had read Peter Pan before this podcast. Like I mentioned, I studied a lot of classics in college, and one of my classes was a children's lit course. So we read Peter Pan for that. I also did the Peter Pan musical in high school. That was probably the first time that I realized Peter Pan wasn't just a Disney movie, that it came from a play originally that was then transformed into a book. But I really enjoyed in college getting to read this original source material. We'll talk about it later, but seeing how it related to the classic Disney movie, what was different, what was the same. And then we actually got to go to London after this. So then getting to see some of the prominent things featured both in the book and in the movie were very cool to actually relate that in person.
So this is actually my second time reading the book. I did read it in my classics phase of college for personal reading. And it was nice to return to it. Getting to read it again with some time that's passed, there were things I definitely forgot. But I think like most of us, my main exposure was through the Disney film. And I did see the play as well. My cousin was in it in her high school musical production, and she was Wendy. So I've seen it in like community theater and high school theaters. So I knew it was a play. I did recognize there was a difference. I love the musical version. I think all the versions I've seen were musical versions of the play. So the later adaptations, not Barrie's original script. But I do think my main exposure, and every time I think Peter Pan, Disney's the first one I think of.
Well, now that we've all read the book or revisited it, what were your thoughts on the book this time around?
I still really enjoy this book. I definitely didn't remember how childlike it is when you're reading it. You feel like you're reading it from the perspective of a child, which is very refreshing because I think Peter Pan is it's a story that is so focused on childhood and what it means to grow up that having the narrator kind of sounds like how a kid would talk, or even like an adult who still has a childlike mindset, which from the background Emily shared, Barrie definitely did. I just felt like that was a really fun way to read this story. I read it very quickly because of that too, and honestly just had fun following these kids running around through Neverland.
I have to agree with what you said with the way the narrator is. And this was very different because, Courtney, you and I have read Mary Poppins and Winnie the Pooh already on this podcast. And those are geared towards kids, but the language isn't the same. It's still very British. Like reading it, you're like, this is British, at least from an American perspective. I can pick out that it's British. But it is a different voice. It does have a different tone to it, whereas we thought Mary Poppins and Winnie the Pooh it was a very narrator voice, but it was like an adult reading to a kid. It felt very like, let's have a shared story time. Whereas you're right, this has a lot more like he breaks the fourth wall if books have a fourth wall. He kind of goes off on tangents. So even though the narrator is not Peter, it's not first person, he does have that rambling and idleness and all over the place like a kid does, it feels so imaginative, which gets your imagination going.
That felt very Charles Dickens to me when he broke the fourth wall, because I remember us discussing that when we did A Christmas Carol, because the narrator there would make little asides. But I, in reading this, had an actual narrator because I have gotten very into audiobooks now that I am commuting more regularly, and I need to give it up to narrator Jim Dale. I have not done the Harry Potter audiobooks, but I know he is most prolifically known for that. I need to give him a shout out because he is Doc Terminus in Pete's Dragon, the wonderful Disney movie that is very underrated, but he was a fantastic narrator, so I really did feel that the narrator was a character in that regard in breaking the fourth wall, so to speak. But he was an utter delight to listen to, and I feel that it truly enhanced my reading of this book by going along on the journey with him. As a first-time reader, I definitely felt the familiarity in certain scenes, but was delighted to discover others as well.
I read about half the book with Jim Dale, and because I listened to Harry Potter first, I did kind of have a hard time sharing because he uses a lot of the same voice. That I was like, that's Ron. No, it's Toodles. So I had a couple of moments where I had to like pause. So I was starting on audiobook, but then we had state testing and I was able to read while proctoring. So I finished it without audiobook.
That's so funny. I mean, it makes sense that he would have, a well of voices to choose from.
But he has... It was really good listening, and he takes those asides and makes that really a little easier to follow. Sometimes, like when you read it, like I read too fast and I'm like, wait, I missed that. Now we're talking about something else. So he really helped navigate that and that pacing.
So kind of thinking about the narrator, one of the asides the narrator goes on pretty early in the book is about Neverland. And Neverland's described various ways. But for example, in the first chapter, it says, Neverland is always more or less an island, with astonishing flashes of color here and there, and coral reefs and rakish-looking craft in the offing, and savages and lonely lairs, and gnomes, who are mostly tailors, and caves through which a river runs, and princes with 6 elder brothers, so on, so on, so on. And then it goes into the next paragraph. Of course, the Neverlands vary a good deal. John's, for instance, had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. And then they move on to Wendy had a pet wolf forsaken by its parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands have a family resemblance. And if they stood still in a row, you could say of them that they have each other's nose, and so forth. So kind of a variety of Neverlands, but with a consistent vibe to them, if you will. So thinking about that, what would be in your Neverland?
I think my Neverland, well, they said it has to be an island. So I think I would still have like the ships, kind of that, like the same Neverland vibe. But I think mine is going to have to end up with a castle on it with a library in there somewhere. So I don't know, maybe Pirates of the Caribbean-ish, but with a castle. Like I need a town and a castle. Mine would probably have something like that. But then you have, I don't know, the pirates and more of that like wild jungle side of Neverland on the other side of the island. So Port City would probably be in mine, where I can get a castle with a wonderful library.
Mine would have to have books as well. I think back to my childhood, and reading remains one of my favorite pastimes. It was a huge part of my childhood. My parents, if they were going to punish me, would threaten to take away my bedtime story, just to give you a sense of how important reading was to me. So I definitely dig the tropical vibe of the island. I'm picturing maybe a little like thatched hut for myself, and I see Neverland as this idyllic, carefree place. And so if I'm going to spend a carefree day, it's going to be reading. But I also want mermaids, because I have always loved the mermaid part of the Peter Pan.
We can keep
Disney
the
film.
mermaids.
The mermaids stay. Maybe the mermaids and I will hang out and read books together, or I'll read to the mermaids. I don't know, but they're going to be there.
Of course, books would have to be involved. I think we all have a library. When I think about my Neverland, I kind of think about like what I would have loved as a child, and I always wanted a tree house. So I think like lots of trees, lots of like forestry with walking paths, and then with the fairies like lighting up at night. So you have like all these like twinkle lights in the trees and all these tree houses kind of built throughout the trees. And I think mermaids is beautiful because like of all the things that I wanted to be real growing up, like mermaids was one of them, fairies was one of them. Magic generally was something that I so much wanted to be real. So there would absolutely be magic in my Neverland. And I kind of picture it, and it's an island, of course, but kind of more with lake type vibes, like a foresty lake island, less tropical island. That would be my dream of a Neverland. But Wilderness Lodge is my favorite resort, so we can't be that surprised.
So with all of us wanting books, I think we would have solved Peter's problem of wanting bedtime stories all the time. If he grew up, maybe like, not grew up, but maybe went to Neverland a little bit later in his life, that he got a little bit of school and learned how to read, that then maybe his Neverland would have had books and he would have had endless supply of stories. But then we wouldn't have an adventure. So kind of thinking about our Neverlands, like we said, and how Neverland is described, there's something for everyone. And the way we describe this, Leeann, the way you just described your island, I was like, oh, Swiss Family Treehouse was the first thing I thought of. But then I was like, I need a castle with a library. Well, that's Fantasyland. You've got Adventureland. We've got, if we could put Space Mountain in there somewhere, Courtney.
That's okay. It doesn't fit everything.
But overall, this idea of what you imagine it to be, what you want out of it, your childhood imagination sparking, would you argue that the Disney parks are a version of Neverland?
I definitely would say so. I feel that a trip to Disney for many people is a form of escape, maybe a return to a simple, carefree time, really for, I'd say, people around our age, within the millennial demographic, maybe older, maybe younger. There's a nostalgia that really Disney taps into that you feel as you enter the gates of a Disney park. So I would definitely say so.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney for all those reasons. I think, and you two can probably speak this a little bit too, working at the park sometimes does not make it feel like a Neverland. But overall, like, it really is a place to escape and to be a child. Like, that's something I've always loved about Disney parks, is you can come as you are and you are welcomed with open arms. I see adults come in to Animal Kingdom, not even Magic Kingdom, and they're so excited to be there. Like, you can see how excited they are. Like, I just think that doesn't happen very many other real life places. There's not very many times that you get to just see these things of your imagination come to life. And obviously it's not an island. There's not real magic, real fairies, but there feels like there's magic and you feel like there's fairies. Like, it's definitely a place where, like, if this was ever going to happen, it would be at a Disney park.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. I agree with you both. But I did want to point that I was really excited to read that part in the book. And it's really early on. It's on it was on like page 11 for me. And I'm glad we pointed this part out, because I always was a little irked, or maybe it's like as you get older and you start analyzing movies and whatnot for plot holes. I was like, why do they know what Neverland looks like if Wendy, John, and Michael have never been there? I could get where maybe they know Peter Pan because he's a myth, and maybe so is Captain Hook, but like, they knew a lot of stuff. They knew where things were. And I'm like, how do you know Captain Hook and his crew before even going there? But now that makes sense, that because they imagined it, they knew it was going to be there. And Peter being this, I don't know if he's magical or what, anomaly, that he is always at Neverland, like, he would know what your Neverland is. So if anyone else was concerned about the plot hole, James and Barrie does sum that up, of why the Darling Children know Neverland before they get there.
Yeah, that was a good way to clear that up. And while we're on the Disney subject as a little precursor, I'd like to know if either of you see Walt Disney as a Peter Pan type figure.
So I've thought about this question a lot since Emily posed it. And I considered it, do I think of Walt Disney as a Peter Pan from the book? And while I definitely think they have similarities in terms of not necessarily growing up, like wanting to live out that childlike spark inside of them, Peter is not nice, and he's very conceited, and something that I might talk about when we get more close on Peter Pan, very forgetful as well. And so to me, especially after seeing the new movie, Peter, Pan and Wendy, I think of Walt Disney as an example of how to grow up well. Like, this is how to become an adult without forgetting what it was like to be a child, and less of someone who doesn't want to grow up, wants to stay like a child for the rest of their life.
Leeann, I think you put that perfectly. Like, I think when we can say, like, is Walt Disney a Peter Pan is kind of like how we say, like, is someone a Pollyanna? It's been able to be boiled down to one characteristic, and Peter's one characteristic is someone who doesn't want to grow up, but you forget all those other pieces about his about who he is as a character. So if we're going with the colloquialism of a Peter Pan, yes, he wants to inspire people to stay in touch with that childhood. But I agree with what you said. If we're basing this based off the book, which we're going to talk about, yeah, I like how you put that. He's an example of how to grow up well. I think you said that really well.
I see we have some good quotes here as well that embody the spirit that both of you are discussing. So Walt has said, "I do not make films primarily for children. I make them for the child in all of us, whether we be 6 or 60. So I feel like that rings true in the spirit of, as you said, maybe not Peter Pan the character, but Peter Pan as we think of never growing up or holding on to moments of childhood.
So maybe Walt is a James M. Barrie, not a Peter Pan.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, and I think, I mean, kind of thinking about Peter more, like, what did the two of you think of our title character, Peter, from the source material, from the book?
Well, for the number of fairy tale favorites we've done on this podcast, and yes, I've read the book before, but, like, I'm not surprised that Peter is darker. Maybe that's just part of how literature and children's stories definitely were in the 19th century. But yeah, he kind of he is the same as the Peter as I've seen in movies, but he's also not. He's described a lot younger than I usually place him. We'll talk about that with the films. But he is more mischievous. He is murderous. He's violent, in such a weird, nonchalant way, in a childlike way, but also murderous. Like, I don't know how to put that clearly. Like, you have to read this to understand that. So it was a little not surprising, but it was interesting to then have to think about how adaptations moving forward have all had to deal with those sides of Peter and how to use them or how to temper them down for the retellings and the audiences that keep revisiting this story and what's good for the time that it's being told. So it was interesting to see that character and the original character of Peter, and then have to think about how I've been introduced to him throughout my lifetime multiple times through different iterations.
I'm going to use some colorful language here, which we don't often do on Book of the Mouse Club, but it's okay because they use it in the book, and that's that Peter is an ass. And I have to agree with Tinkerbell's frequent description of him. Though I will say, not to tip my hand too much as we move into comparing, that's pretty consistent with the Disney version. So maybe I'll save some of those thoughts for later, but I found that description to be apt.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of you. I have a lot of thoughts about Peter Pan just as a character generally, but he is very childlike, but not how I was as a child, if that makes sense. Like this, I wish I had time to do more research on like Edwardian children and the expectations as they grew up. Like, were they allowed to be this selfish? I don't know. I don't know that answer. But I don't know, Emily, if your book had this, but my book had like the original engravings from the
yes, mine did too.
novel. And Peter looks very young to me, younger than the movies.
I would say 7 or 8-ish, maybe, yes. If I'm being, and 9 I think would be generous.
And we discussed this offline a little bit. The pictures just generally make all the children look younger to me than I thought they were. And so that also kind of colored me a little bit when I was considering Peter throughout this book, like trying to remind myself that he is a little kid. He doesn't have the life experience to know what's polite, like what's allowed, what shouldn't be said, what shouldn't be done, that the darling children, especially Wendy, may have learned already.
And kind of like what you said with the Edwardian children, I think something like we've had offline, we were trying to debate forever, like how old are these kids to be considered that Wendy is worried about growing up? Or like if he's 7, 8 years old, I was not really worried about growing up at 7, 8 years old. Like, if anything, some things looked cooler, like, oh, because I had an older sister that I was like, oh, when I get older, I can do these things that she can do. But thinking about what you said, Edwardian England, Victorian era, when was growing up, like 13 to us were like, oh, they're a preteen already, but they might have been like what that looked like was very different. Being a 9-year-old in 18 when this was written in 1911 was very different than being a 9-year-old in 2023. So you kind of have to suspend, and they don't say the age. So I guess that kind of helps that you can kind of make Peter the age that you think is appropriate for having these debates and discussions in your head when you're reading this. But what we're talking about Peter, and he is selfish. He is murderous. He is mischievous. But why do you think that he's such a beloved character? Even today, by today's standards, Peter Pan is such a beloved character. Why do you think that holds?
I don't know, because I don't like Peter Pan. Okay, I like the movie, but really when you think about his character, and maybe this has been me as an adult revisiting the Disney film, I'm like, he's an ass. But if I really had to think about it, I guess it has to do more with the broader themes of the story and the adventurous nature of it. So I would say maybe Peter Pan is a beloved book, but not necessarily a character, but please feel free to contradict me on that.
No, I agree, Courtney. I mean, I think you guys have both discussed this on your earlier podcast. Like, children's stories were not always light and fluffy and pixie dusted. Like, they were dark. They had dark themes. So I think Peter is both a cautionary tale and also a nostalgic reminder. I think he's lasted this long because who doesn't have days where, like, I wish I never grew up and I was still a child and I was running around playing make-believe all the time. But also, this story, but also Peter Pan is an example of why you can't do that. Just like Christmas can't be every day, you can't not grow up because then you'll be like Peter. So I think it works both ways. You have Peter as both, wow, don't we all wish we could be this child? but also this is why we don't want to be this child.
I agree with what you both said. And I think you're right. It's the nostalgia part. And I think what I said earlier about how we've boiled Peter Pan down to just that one characteristic of that childlike innocence of not wanting to grow up and not having to face the harsh realities of the world. And I think that's what makes him an endearing character, an enduring story, that's the word I want, over time. Maybe not necessarily the Peter that is in the book, but the concept of Peter is still beloved.
Would you say that Peter is a hero or a villain?
This is such a complicated question because, as any true 21st century Disney movie would tell you, there's no dichotomies anymore. I think he's both. I mean, kind of what I said, like in the book, you have Peter set up as the hero against Hook's villain, which is very much how I believe Barrie thinks you should read the book, is that Peter is the side of light and Hook is the side of dark. However, I also think that they contrast each other. The newest movie has kind of colored my opinions on this a little bit because of how much more they delve into who Hook is. But overall, I think it's an example of Hook being afraid of dying and of time passing, and of Peter having the luxury of never being afraid of that. And so in that sense, I guess I would say Peter is a hero because he's not concerned about that, whereas Hook's worry and fear of death consumes him and ultimately is his end, in my opinion. But I don't know. I mean, like Courtney said, Peter is not someone you're rooting for when you're reading this book. Honestly, the darling children are who I'm rooting for when I'm reading this book. I want them to get home. Maybe that's because I'm an adult and I'm old and I'm stressed, but I'm like, go home, go to your parents. They're so sad you're gone. So yeah, it's just hard to think of, like, if he would be one or the other.
So actually, in the stuff that I read, now granted, I will say my research is limited to like 3 or 4 sources between online and whatever Barnes & Noble put together. But in one of the sources I read, it said that Barrie actually intended for Peter to be a little bit more of a villain, to be read as a villain. But I think maybe a better label for him would maybe be the anti-hero, which I did a quick Google search of that definition to make sure I'm using this right. And from vocabulary.com, the first thing that popped up, it says an anti-hero is a main character of a story, but one who does not act like a typical hero. Anti-heroes are often a little villainous. Traditionally, the protagonist, main character, and focus of the story has been the hero, someone noble, good, and brave. Peter falls somewhere in there. He's more villainous in his regards. The way for him to achieve his ends is more aligned with the villain, even if his goals tend to be more tend to be, quote, noble, preserving the innocence of children. So maybe he's more of an anti-hero, but he's interesting to Wendy, going back and forth, because I think between, like you said, Captain Hook and Peter, Hook is the villain, Peter is the hero, simply because any threat to child in our societies, I think, enduring over time is seen as bad. But when you turn to the conflict between Peter and Wendy, does he then turn into more of that anti-hero? And she goes back and forth. Like, at some point, she finally gets fed up with him in Neverland. She doesn't want to be, we're going to talk about mothers, but, like, she's tired of playing mother. And she's like, what is this? You get all the benefits of this pretend game and I don't. She's the one who prompts Michael and John. She starts missing her mother, and she's like, maybe we do need to go back. And she starts to see the downside of not growing up. But then when she gets home, suddenly she's like Mrs. Peter. She wants to also stay at Neverland too. So I kind of see how he might be a villain in a way to Wendy down the line, or a villain in the sense that she now has to be in conflict with him. But yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I feel often we intrinsically link hero and protagonist together, but that's not the case in this book. I would say that Wendy is the protagonist. She's whose journey we're following. The book opens with describing her at 2 years old and kind of how she realizes she's going to grow up, and it's her journey of growing up that is the focus of this, and Peter's a crux within that. I guess ultimately we're supposed to see him as a hero to Wendy, but he is, as you shared, a complex hero within that. There is a clear-cut dichotomy to me in how both Peter and Hook are presented, as Leeann so expertly, gave insights into. So if we're going to skew one way or the other, Peter's the hero, Captain Hook is the villain to me, but both are not without their own complications.
Right. Like, I think at the end of the day, you don't want Hook's fears and personality traits and like who he is to be good. Like, you don't want Hook to be the hero of the story. So then I think it's kind of like, well, then therefore it must be Peter. But like we've said, it's just so much more complicated than that. But speaking about Wendy and mothers, like you did, Emily, mothers are a very big part of this story. You go to Neverland when you're abandoned by your mother for a week. Such an interesting span of time. The Lost Boys desperately want a mother, however, and so that's why Wendy comes and pretends to be their mother. So why do you guys think that mothers are so central to this story?
So I found this so interesting because for someone who doesn't want to grow up, Wendy immediately jumps into playing mother, which is pretty normal when you look at how children play or how society has taught children to play. Girls with baby dolls, like I played with dolls as a kid. You kind of imitate mother or you imitate people in your family in pretend play. So I found that interesting that for someone who doesn't want to grow up, she pretends to be a grown-up the whole time in Neverland as well. But I think motherhood's so important, especially to Peter and these Lost Boys, because if you don't want to grow up, then you need someone to take care of you so that you don't have to take care of yourself.
I feel it's also a reflection of women's roles at the time in Edwardian London. I mean, I haven't studied that time period too specifically, but I believe based on the time frame, women were very limited in what they could offer to society. So motherhood was aspirational in a way, and I feel that this is a reflection of that.
I do think it is interesting, like you said, though, how motherhood is growing up. We're all 90s babies, and even we played house where you were the mother and had children. So that's something that kids definitely did. But I think partly when Wendy gets upset is when it becomes too real to her. When she has, I think Michael is like, I think you're my mother at this point. I don't know who my mother is. And she's like, that's not good because I don't want to be your mother. And just kind of how, like, she could have been a secretary. She had other job options. Like, I'm assuming they're not rich in the book. They have a lot of mentions of how the Darlings pretend to have more wealth than they actually do. And I do think that sometimes British aristocracy, that's how you say it, and their class system essentially is not the same as American. So sometimes I was a little confused, like, are they in the right class? They just don't have the money to be there. I don't know. But anyway, it just felt like she probably had a couple of paths she could have taken. She was obviously educated, but ultimately she would be a mother. And it was when in Neverland that she became a mother that Wendy said, okay, we're done. It's time to go home. And so I think it's both an example of Wendy being ready to grow up, but also Wendy not being there quite yet, if that made sense.
I think so. I think that's, like I said earlier, classics continue to have something to tell depending on the lens. Like maybe 20 years from now, reading about this and discussing Wendy's motherhood, that interpretation can continue to evolve. I think it's a really great ongoing conversation of the role of motherhood in women. I don't know if that is something that Barrie intended, but we're having that conversation. And we're going to now pull ourselves into Disney's 1953 animated film, Peter Pan. And through this, we will continue to talk about stuff in the books and particularly things that were different, plot points, etc. But to get us there, Courtney, as always, will you share with us some background from our favorite magical reference book, Disney A to Z?
Yes, I heard it's coming up on its 6th edition, but in consulting my available resources, the Peter Pan entry shares that, quote, story of the magical boy who wouldn't grow up, and who teaches the three darling children, Wendy, John, and Michael, to fly to Neverland with him, where they embark on adventures with the chief inhabitants, Captain Hook, and his crew of pirates. The fairy Tinkerbell is jealous of Peter's attentions to Wendy and duped into helping Captain Hook. After rescuing the Indian princess Tiger Lily, Peter must save his band, the Lost Boys and the Darlings, from Hook. Released February 5th, 1953, directed by Hamilton Lusky, Clyde Jerome, Wilfred Jackson. Features the voice of Bobby Driscoll as Peter, Catherine Beaumont as Wendy, Hans Conried as Captain Hook and Mr. Darling, and Bill Thompson as Mr. Smee, the captain's only friend. 77 minutes, features the songs You Can Fly, You Can Fly, You Can Fly, The Second Star to the Right, and Your Mother and Mine by Sammy Kahn and Sammy Fain. Walt Disney planned this feature as early as 1935 to make this film, arranging in 1939 with the Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, who had the rights to the play bequeathed by author James M. Barrie, for permission, but it was not until 1949 that production actually began. It was re-released in theaters in 1958, 1969, 1976, 1982, and 1989, and then released on video in 1990, end quote. And I do just want to call out the description of Tiger Lily was verbatim from the Disney agency entry, and we will definitely be getting into Tiger Lily later, but please don't cancel me for reading from the reference book. Thank you. Outside of that brief summary and history, I would love to know each of your thoughts or memories on this animated classic as a whole.
I had so much fun rewatching this. Peter Pan was not a movie that I watched a lot as a kid. We probably owned it on VHS, but it wasn't one that I turned to multiple times like I did for others. I was much more of a 90s film person when I was a child, but I just enjoy the simplicity of it. I enjoyed the music. The music's very good, and how we quickly get through the story without feeling like we lost much of the plot. But I will say, for memories wise, Peter Pan was not something that I have a lot of nostalgia for. It's just another fun Disney movie that I enjoyed watching.
So for me, Peter Pan was not one that in my personal home we went to a lot. Like I said, 90s kids, we're going for the Renaissance. But I was babysat a lot by my grandparents, who are both babies of the 20s. So for them, Disney 1950s films were maybe the Disney films that they reached for. So it was one that if I was at my grandparents' house was much more readily that we pulled to, because my grandmother was quite an avid movie watcher. Like that's what we did together, was we watched movies. A lot of classic films. You can thank her for my Singing in the Rain obsession, Courtney, that made us friends. But if she was going to watch a Disney film, Cinderella and Peter Pan were two that she regularly went to. So I watched it a lot with them. So my nostalgic memories are really much tied to also my feelings of being with my grandparents. So it is one that I do like to revisit. It's one that I put on a lot sometimes when like I want to fall asleep or just like feel comforted, like on a sick day, or I need to fall asleep. It's one I turn to just because it's comforting. Yes, problematic in different spots of the film. But like you said, the music particularly is nostalgic to me, and that's what makes me reach for it sometimes.
Yeah, I'd say my experience was similar to both of you. Definitely owned it on VHS. It was in our library, but not one that I reached for often. I feel like I more associated it with, I alluded to this at the beginning, but some of the sing-along songs, because following the leader, I think one of the sing-along collections was called You Can Fly, and certainly had a bunch of other random songs on it. But I think of those scenes specifically, I'd watch it every so often, but it was not a regular staple for me as well.
Yeah, and I think too, with this film, it definitely changes stuff with Barrie's original story. And so I guess what I would ask is, do you feel that overall the film upheld the integrity of that original source content that Barrie created?
I think it does. If we're going based off of original source to this film, I think, like you said, Leeann, it moves quickly. It does omit some details, but it's not like omitting details the way like that it changes the story in any way. We have all the major plot points. Peter, while dialed down, is very much Peter, which we'll talk about. So to me, I think they're pretty darn true to the original source material, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree. It hits all of the right beats. Certainly we'll get into maybe how it was cut down or streamlined, but in terms of the message and the themes of growing up and what Wendy faces in that decision, I feel it brings that to the forefront very quickly and continues on throughout the film.
I agree. I think one thing in particular that I was interested in is how the violence is toned down in the film. So, for example, in the book, Wendy is actually shot down by an arrow. An arrow hits her and she falls down. Whereas in the film, they shoot at her, but they do not actually hit her. And then Peter swoops in and saves her before she lands. And like the pirates, they do shoot their cannon at the children, but it's not as dramatic as it is in the book. And the one thing I did notice though in the film is, much like the book, Hook does kill a pirate early on, but I didn't notice that as a kid. They're on the ship, the pirate is singing, and then Hook lazily pulls out his gun and just points in this direction. You hear a gunshot, and then the falling sound, and then a splash. And I was watching this just recently for this podcast. I go, oh my gosh, he killed that man. Like, it never occurred to me as a kid that was something that was happening, which is, I think, something that Disney has always been good at. But that kind of made me think of a main difference that I do wonder what you guys thought about, which is that the Darling parents do not know their children are missing in the movie. Whereas in the book, we go back to the parents and see that both Mr. and Mrs. Darling know their children are gone and are fairly devastated about it, but also seem to assume they will return. So what did you guys think about them not having that in the movie?
I think it was for streamlining purposes. It's a pretty short film at 77 minutes, definitely one of the shorter Disney features, especially compared to runtimes now. So I can understand why the directors wouldn't necessarily want to take us out of the Neverland journey once we're there.
I think it also helps to strengthen that difference between child and adult. Peter Pan is for children, even though in the book we know that they learn of Peter Pan's story because Mrs. Darling tells them the story. Like, he is a myth that gets passed down through bedtime stories. So it is kind of weird that we're led to assume, I think, in the Disney film that Wendy knows Peter because he's visited to hear other bedtime stories. Like, she meets Peter and therefore knows him, versus having that passed down. And I think that further solidifies because at the end, Mr. Darling, when she's like, oh no, Peter left, and the other Lost Boys, they weren't ready to grow up yet. Other big difference. They're like, do you see him? And then the parents look out the window and they see the cloud that looks like the pirate ship. And he's like, I don't remember, but it reminds me of something as a child, like paraphrasing. And I think that helps also space out that you are supposed to forget. And I think you're right, though, mostly, Courtney, that the streamlining process and also time is different in Neverland. Do we ever know how long they're in Neverland? We know they're gone for a while, but like a week? Is a week like 2 years?
I feel like in the book, the narrator was like, time passes differently in Neverland. So it was never made explicitly clear how long they were gone. But it definitely didn't feel like it was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they're like gone for 7 years, but they've actually been gone for 20 minutes in the real world.
Well, that's what Peter Pan is, because they're back before the parents get home from the party.
In the movie, yeah.
Yeah, in the movie.
I meant in the book.
In Disney's Peter Pan,
yes.
It's that Lion in Which the Wardrobe effect.
Yeah. But
they've been gone for a while, but the parents never had a chance to notice.
In the book, the rules were kind of stated, but they were a little hard for me to follow.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just one night. They're gone for several days at least in the book.
So yeah, I think with these differences overall, like using Wendy not being directly shot down, we do have the one pirate dying, but also we know Hook reaches his comeuppance off screen. That's pretty Disney, that villains, we know they die.
Well,
we don't
he technically doesn't die because he's in Return to
True.
Neverland,
Oh,
the
you're right.
sequel from the 2000s.
You're right. That I've watched one time.
Oh my gosh. This is a good time to mention that I had an entire birthday party themed around that film.
No way.
We went and we saw the film. My parents. Yep, the second one.
It went to theaters.
It did. My parents had to hunt down a theater in Indianapolis where it was showing. I got to bring all my friends. I had a Peter Pan themed cake with like Tinkerbell hats and party plates, and that was my birthday.
Amazing.
Love that for you.
That's so great. But I think a lot of this toning it down is kind of that Disney effect. We don't lose the story, but we did tone down the violence a little bit. So with that said, speaking of violence, let's talk about Peter. I know Courtney's got some hot takes ready for us. So how does Peter in Disney's film compare to Peter in Barrie's story?
I mean, he's less murdery, but he's still an ass. And look, I know we don't curse on this podcast, but it was in the text of the book.
We're quoting Tinkerbell.
So we are quoting Tinkerbell, and I'm not going to bleep it. But really, that's what he is. And I have thought that for a while now, not just in any revisiting for this show. As I said, I don't put it on often, but I feel that it was probably a few years ago. Doug and I were like, oh, we haven't watched that one in a while. This was, I know everything's on Disney Plus, but we invested a lot of money in the Blu-rays with digital copies. So we have our own library, and we threw it on, and we're sitting there watching it. And we're like, poor Wendy. Everybody is just so mean to Wendy in this movie. Tinkerbell is mean to her. Peter Pan is mean. He's very bossy. So, as I said before, I feel that the counterpart, the description fits. If the shadow fits, wear it.
I actually wrote down a quote because when the movie started, I was like, I think this Peter is nicer if I recall. And then at one point, Wendy says, my stories, but they're all about you. And Peter replies, yes, that's why I like them. And he said that, and I said, oh, yes, he's just as bad. Because that both book Peter and 1953 Disney movie Peter are very self-centered, which I think lots of children are self-centered, but I think they're both self-centered to an extreme amount. So the scene in both the book and the movie that I think illustrates this is like, I would say, quote unquote, the rescue of Tiger Lily. I think she would have been fine without him, but whatever. And Peter thinks it's a game. It's fun to him. He likes impersonating Hook. He likes showing off to Wendy. He doesn't really care if Tiger Lily gets saved or not. Like in the movie, she's like about to drown, and Wendy's like, Tiger Lily, and Peter's like, oh yeah, I forgot about her. Like he was just having so much fun besting Hook and showing off that he didn't really care about saving her. And so I think that's a good representation of just who Peter Pan is. He's here to have fun. He's here to have adventures. He's here about himself, first and foremost.
I think that we're right, that it is consistent, but the way Disney toned him down enough that I think is what can make him a more endearing character. And the version of Peter, I think, one, it helps it was a film, more mass media. But I think that's the version of Peter that people can accept maybe a little bit better. Like if you went from watching and knowing that as Peter and then you read the book, you'd be like, whoa. Because he is a little bit more, he is more extreme in the book, even though the tendencies are all still there. Some of the lines are verbatim from the book. I think he's toned down enough that he's not a different character, but he's a more acceptable character, if that makes sense. We can forgive him to an extent. Courtney can't. To an extent for being who he is. And accept that that's just the nature of being in Neverland versus, I think, if he was the full version of himself from the book, he'd be a little too much.
That makes sense. Well, how do you feel that Disney either plussed the story from the original material, or maybe you feel that they didn't plus the story? How do y'all feel about the animators' adjustments?
I just think visually getting to see Neverland is so rewarding in the film. Obviously, the book kind of wants you to picture it a little differently based on what you think of as Neverland, so that is taken away in the movie. But it's just such an easy way to see what it's like to be on this kind of imaginary, mystical place in real life. Like the Mermaid Lagoon is one of my favorite scenes in that, much like Courtney, but partly just because like you picture all these beautiful mermaids combing their hair, and it's not quite the same impact in the book as it is in the movie. And I think, of course, we probably all agree on how the source material isn't plus, but also the source material isn't great about anyway, is its treatment of what they call Indians in the book. I will be completely honest, I can't watch the scene in the movie where they sing What Makes the Red Man Red. I'm too uncomfortable. I had to fast forward through it. I couldn't listen to it. It was just too hard as a person in 2023 to listen to that song. And so I think in the book even there is that savage element to that stereotype, but I think it's even worse in the movie.
I have to agree on all of that. The artistry is beautiful. It's Mary Blair. We know how we feel about Mary Blair. Love the colors. Just I think that's something that does also keep me going back to that film is the colors, is the animation. Tinkerbell is just so cool. Those scenes with her, that animation to me is just so fun and beautiful. So in those ways it plus it. I think the music, with the exception of one song, pluses it. You Can Fly is just beautiful to hear. And we'll talk about the theme parks, but then having You Can Fly and then Tinkerbell flies, the tears are starting to like, oh, it's just so great. So those to me, I think plussed it. I did think they're trimming down and moving the story along is also a plus in this. While this is not a long story to read, I think this Barnes Noble version I have, it's 150, maybe 155 pages. It's not long, but if you do get distracted by that narration style and that makes it difficult for you to read, this I think does streamline that a little bit better, that you can follow all the main plot points of Peter Pan and still have a pretty accurate depiction of the book. But like you said, Leeann, what is also unfortunately accurate is the Walt Disney picture description and caricature of Indigenous people is also how it was portrayed in the book as well. And I think you have an interesting point that it's worse, and I think it's worse because they illustrate the caricature. So Disney putting salt in the wound there. But that was kind of unfortunate. I was kind of hoping maybe the book wouldn't be so bad. Like I wasn't expecting good, but I was hoping that maybe it would just kind of be like, and there's Tiger Lily's encampment, and then like move on, like not play a huge role too much. But yeah, the descriptions, that unfortunately is just what was the mainstream white Eurocentric belief and stereotype of Indigenous people, and it persisted through. But that being said, if we're talking true to the source material, Disney did a good job on that.
Yeah, definitely unfortunate looking through today's lens, so I would agree on both of those points. But I wanted to riff on the visual element. I think one of the biggest pluses to this story is Tinkerbell. You know, she's sassy, she's feisty, but we really get an embodiment of her within this. She does not speak, so she doesn't have a voice of her own, and her voice is kind of Peter interpreting in the book, but she's able to convey so much through the way that the animators, I believe it's Mark Davis, gave her so much personality without saying anything at all. And I think to the stage depictions as I know them, Tinkerbell was just a light floating around the stage in a little jingle bell, but she has become such a beloved character for so many from this film, and I think that's really to credit Mark Davis and the other animators that worked on her character in particular.
Yeah, she's like the second spokesperson from the company behind Mickey. Like, you immediately, Wonderful World of Disney is Tinkerbell, Flying Over the Castle is Tinkerbell. Like, she's probably in the top 5 characters. If you ask someone to name, she's going to be one of the first.
Yeah, and I just think generally Tinkerbell, but also the themes of this movie, like pixie dust, you can fly, they have become such an incorporated part of the Walt Disney Company generally. It's something that you can't escape. Like when we had the 50th celebration at Disney World, the cards, everyone wants Tinkerbell. Everyone wants Tinkerbell. It's Mickey Mouse and Tinkerbell. And so kind of like you were saying, like she really is, I don't want to say second to Mickey, but she's up there.
Top 5, I think is
yeah, she's up there. People love Tinkerbell. And I've never been a Tinkerbell super fan. I think the new movie, I don't want to get it too far ahead. Love that Tinkerbell. But she's just very sassy in a way that I've never been. But I think generally, I guess kind of thinking about Disney theme parks specifically, but like, what do you think about how the film is represented in the theme parks?
I think it is the embodiment of Fantasyland to me, at least original Fantasyland. I know we've got now princesses is of dominating force, particularly as we moved through the 90s, but the idea of Fantasyland and imagination and going back to fairy tales and that childlike nostalgia, Peter Pan is Fantasyland. And the ride is incredible. That dark ride is such a classic that even I still have to ride it every time I go. I enjoy it that much. But to me, it is the embodiment of it, and it fits. And I think other than Epcot, where we have topiaries, did they meet and greet in Epcot at any point? I don't think so as characters, but pretty much like they dominate Magic Kingdom between Festival of Fantasy. They're always in the fireworks show. Tinkerbell flying over the castle in Walt Disney World is incredibly iconic and my favorite part of the entire fireworks show. To me, that's great. I do wish we had a Skull Rock though, like they do in Disneyland Paris. I really want to see Skull Rock.
Originally had one, but it is still alive and well at Disneyland Paris. But unfortunately, the one time that I visited Disneyland Paris, it was closed for refurbishment, so I didn't really get to see it. But you certainly can find Peter Pan's flight, I believe, at almost every Disney park, and that is, to me, the quintessential Disney dark ride. Flying over the scapes and the ride vehicle itself. I will say, even though I'm not a big fan of Peter Pan as a person, clearly Peter Pan and Wendy are one of the more delightful meet and greets that you encounter because I feel like there's often such a fun, organic energy. Peter can often be found just like running around as an agent of chaos and getting guests involved. So he is a delight to interact with in the parks.
I also really enjoy their moment in Festival of Fantasy. I love Festival of Fantasy, but they're on the pirate ship in the sky, which to me is like, that's the finale of the film, like the pirate ship going away and they're in charge. But then you have Hook underneath swaying on the anchor. And I don't think they intended it to be this deep. But after reading the book, I'm like, oh, that's such a good image of like how like, you know, youth and childhood is always gonna be at the top, but you have that lingering adulthood. It's always right there under you. Anyway, that's just what I thought reading this book. But I think that the fact that Tinkerbell sets off the fireworks, and I can't imagine a fireworks show without her at this point, is so telling of how integrated Peter Pan is. I mean, Peter Pan's flight, God love it, not like the most impressive attraction, but it has the longest wait. It is so popular. People love that ride. And without getting into too much logistics of attractions for why it has a longer wait, just generally it has the demand to have these people come because, you know, you do get to fly over all these scenes from the movie and get to have that Peter Pan experience of getting to go to Neverland. And also, Courtney, much like you, I did not get to see Skull Rock when I went to Disneyland Paris because it was closed then too.
Oh my gosh!
I think it must just have some problems.
Keep updating
we
it.
all need to go back to Disneyland Paris,
but make sure it's open.
I think overall, with everything we said, even though this might not be a film that people reach for, and especially today, and we've already started talking about things that are problematic, it would be missed if we were to remove Peter Pan from the parks. Even if it's not, again, the film that people reach for, people resonate with these characters and with that nostalgia and Neverland and that concept of childhood, that you can't take them out of the parks without losing a heart of kind of what Disney has embodied itself to be.
This year is the 70th anniversary of the original animated film, and in the spirit of the anniversary, a live-action remake of the film titled Peter Pan and Wendy, tying similarly from J.M. Barrie's original title of the 1911 book addressing both Peter and Wendy, was released on Disney Plus very recently on April 28th, 2023, and I found the brief description from Disney's official Disney Plus site. Peter Pan and Wendy introduces Wendy Darling, a young girl afraid to leave her childhood home behind, who meets Peter Pan, a boy who refuses to grow up. Alongside her brothers and a tiny fairy Tinkerbell, she travels with Peter to the magical world of Neverland, and there she encounters an evil pirate captain, Captain Hook, and embarks on a thrilling and dangerous adventure that will change her life forever. End quote. This film was directed by David Lowery, who also directed the 2016 live-action remake of Pete's Dragon for Disney. So at the surface level, it sounds like a very similar film, but if you haven't watched it yet, here's your official spoiler alert. It is quite different. So let's share our reactions to watching this brand new film.
So at the beginning, so we all watched this at the same time and texted each other, just so our listeners understand. But I, at the beginning, was like, this is nothing like the book. And I kept writing, like, what is happening? This is very different. And then once I let go of that, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. I feel like it's a really good example of how classics like Peter Pan can still work in a modern age. Changes did happen to make this film, but nothing that feels like it strayed from the true spirit of the book and the other original movie. I think they're good changes that needed to be made for a movie made in 2023, but still give us that story of what does it mean to grow up and the Peter Pan Hook contrast too.
I think like most people now, every time we get a live action remake, I'm now apprehensive. The first few were fun and fine. And then as others come out, now we have this trend of constantly remaking animated films. So I was a little apprehensive. I was like, well, I have to watch it. We're going to talk about it. But this was one that pleasantly surprised me. I very much enjoyed it. I think Disney's been doing a better job with live action remakes of films that are over 30 years old, like going back to Cinderella, going back to like pulling on Maleficent out of Sleeping Beauty. When we're making these films are 50, 60 years down the line. I think we're more ready for new stories from those. And I agree with you, said Leeann, the staying power of Peter Pan is present in this film, but gives us kind of the Peter Pan that we want now. And we're going to have so much fun talking about, particularly the female characters in this movie are fantastic. And I will admit it, I cried at the end, not like sobbing, but like I got teary-eyed at the end. And that was surprising to me that I was that moved. So regardless of what critics or reviews are saying, I'm with you. I enjoyed it. And if it made me cry, then I think it was a successful film.
Y'all, I am the Debbie Downer today, and I am a cold-hearted, cynical person in a cold-hearted, cynical world, and I struggled with the film, but I do feel optimistic, but maybe by the end of this discussion, you will convince me to revisit it and have an appreciation. In your text message exchanges, we were getting me there, but maybe I just went into this with the wrong attitude, because Emily, you said Disney's good at remaking films that are 30 years old or more, but I am going to throw a little bit of shade, and Pete's Dragon was not one of them. So I absolutely hated the 2016 Pete's Dragon film. So I feel like I went into this with the wrong attitude, realizing it was the same director. And I was like, oh, geez, okay, here we go. So that is entirely on me. And I don't think I had shared this in our thread, but we all watched this on Monday. I tried to watch it on Thursday or Friday. I can't remember what day it was. And I made it a half hour. And I was just like, I am not feeling this. let's watch something else, and I turned it off. So it took me the second time to get through it, knowing that I had to. So I'm sorry, I am going to be the cynical voice on this one, but I look forward to hearing all of your positive insights as you maybe convince me to feel better about it.
Full disclosure, I wasn't in love with this film, but I did enjoy it, having done a whole Peter Pan marathon with the book and the other movie.
I liked that you did it back to back, and maybe I should have done that. I did my revisiting at separate times.
So, I mean, one thing to kind of help us think through this film, though, how do you think it upholds the integrity of the original source material?
If we're going with integrity in the sense that does it keep with the themes of growing up and what it means to have to overcome that transition, yes. If we're going with integrity of how did it translate the original source material to screen, I would give it maybe a 6 out of 10, where a lot of the characters were there, the setting was there, a lot of the major plot points were there, although we got no mermaids. We saw them, but we didn't visit a lagoon. That just hit me. So maybe a 5 out of 10. Those parts, no, we have quite a few differences written down that we can discuss. But I think the overall of what you think of Peter Pan as a concept and a theme, yes. But maybe not the verbatim source material that Walt Disney's 1953 animated film did.
Yeah, it's familiar enough that if you know this world from any one of the many derivative source materials, whether Disney or not, you will be able to kind of quickly adapt to this version. But I felt that it differed quite a bit otherwise. But I wish I had taken Leeann's attitude. It was like, it's different, and that's okay, and I'm just going to appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, I was looking through my notes when I watched this, and at the beginning, I'm literally like going point by point, what is different and what in my head was wrong. Like, for example, I got so mad that they just roped up Nana with no cause whatsoever. I'm like, she's just being her dog self, and they're like, okay, time to go get tied up outside. And I'm like, but nothing happened. Why is she getting tied up outside? I don't understand. And silly things. I was like, the window is closed. The window should not be closed. It should be open. What is wrong with this movie? But I do think generally, when you think about the themes of the book, it stays true to the themes. But like you both said, in terms of plot points and point by point what the characters were like, it is very different. It is not the same Wendy. It is not the same Peter Pan. It is not the same Hook. Tinkerbell is vastly different. And I think in a good way, but it's something that definitely assumes that you know the original material enough that you will understand the changes.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of these differences then, and then how it compares to the animated film. One big difference that I kind of want to throw out there that I noticed right away that I thought was like, other than being detail oriented, but pretty plot oriented, is that Peter is almost summoned by Wendy. He says, I was waiting for you to say it. She hadn't met him before. And she's like, say what? She said, I needed you to say, I don't want to grow up. And that's now seen as the catalyst that when a child in the world says that, Peter comes to them and offers them an alternative. And he's been waiting for Wendy. He loves the story, so he knows her. We find out later, again, spoiler alert, other big difference we'll talk about, that used to be the house he lived in. So that's why he also keeps going back to that neighborhood. But that's what he was waiting for, whereas that's a really big difference. Whereas Wendy is kind of pursuing Peter and looking for Peter. But in this case, there's a lot more urgency. What did you think about that?
For me, in both the book and the original film, Peter is much cockier, much more self-centered, and more importantly, in the book, he's forgetful. He doesn't remember anything. So when this movie started, and not only does Peter remember who Wendy is, remember why he's going to this house, remember that he needed her to summon him like that, he does that throughout the entire film. He does not forget things like the Peter in the book does in particular. Because when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, this is a mark of his innocence. He doesn't remember killing other pirates. He doesn't remember meeting Wendy. He doesn't remember Tinkerbell. Like, he is a child because he can maintain that innocence by never remembering the bad or sad things. Whereas this Peter not only remembers, but he feels things. He is deep in his feelings in a way that only a Gen Z Peter Pan could be. And I just feel like that, to me, was a huge difference in this movie compared to the animated film, but also the book.
Yeah, I think he's the least ass Peter Pan of all of them. He's more endearing to me. And another piece that was endearing compared to both I'd say the text source material as well as the original Disney film is the diversity that we get in our characters. They're still called the Lost Boys, but they say that, some of them are girls, and that was really fun for me to see, as well as seeing diverse casting in the actors, not just in not just in race, but also differently abled cast members, as like one of Peter's right-hand Lost Boys, was exciting to see portrayed here.
Yeah, I found that a really great change. And I think that's a change, like we said, how you can change the source material without losing its purpose and its themes. They're very much kids who don't want to grow up, who want to have adventures. I think they're funnier. I think they had a lot more personality. Even though they didn't get a lot of time on screen, like they're just kind of there. They're just part of the adventure. I think they had a lot more personality. I was more intrigued by them in the live action than I was in the animated film.
I have one change I forgot to mention that I might rate about, and it is the crocodile, because this movie has the audacity to give the crocodile a 2-minute scene and then he's gone. No longer in the film. Whereas in the book and in the original animated thing, he is so important, because that is Hook's reminder that growing up and death is coming for him. Like, that ticking of the clock and the crocodile are so symbolic, especially in the book, that to just get rid of that was wild to me. I thought that you could have told Hook's story like they do in this film and kept the crocodile, because I think his fear of that crocodile, his fear of clocks, which they do mention in this movie, is so telling of who Hook is and why he is as evil as he is. And to just discard that, at the end of the movie, I said, so that's just it? We're done with the crocodile? We don't care about him anymore? Oh, I was so mad.
No, that's a good point. I didn't really think about it because I was so distracted by how ridiculous the crocodile looked when it did appear on screen.
I know, it was huge.
It was. It was a really big crocodile. So I'm glad that you brought that up. One thing we have continuously alluded to or brought up in discussing about this as a whole is the female characters in this remake. So let's get into them and how they evolved from the original.
So to go in opposite direction of how angry I am about the crocodile, I am thrilled with how the female characters in this movie are treated. I don't remember exactly what I texted, but it was something like, Wendy, Tinkerbell, and Tiger Lily are my trio. I love them so much. I am not a huge Tinkerbell person. So when I watched this movie and got to see Tinkerbell be kind and smart, and her and Wendy have this strong female bond, I was like, this is the Tinkerbell I have always wanted. I loved her. And a major change is Tiger Lily, because when the movie gets to Neverland, Tiger Lily rolls up on her beautiful white stallion with the Lost Boys behind her, and I wrote down, Tiger Lily's in charge? Heck yes! Because she's so wise. I don't know if this is intentional. The actress appears older than the other children, so she has this more I don't want to say adult, because she's not an adult, but she has a wiser sense to her, that she knows better of what's going on and how to help the Lost Boys and Peter and the Darling children than others may. She also gets to save Peter, which, that made me so happy. Instead of Peter saving her, it's the other way around. I love them all so much. There's so much we could say.
I think this goes back to what you said, Courtney, that Wendy is the protagonist of the story. And sometimes we forget that because we get so focused on Peter because he's the mythical character. This film, I thought, very much reminded us that it is the female characters who are the protagonists of the story. And they gave Tiger Lily and Tinkerbell a little bit more of an equal footing with Wendy. And I really enjoyed the changes that it's Wendy who starts fighting Captain Hook and saves the Lost Boys from walking over from the plank and becoming pirates before Peter gets there because Tiger Lily saved him when he was stabbed. I liked that it's Tinkerbell who helps Wendy fly and not splash into the water. Like you said, that trio, they gave them a lot more empowerment, and at no point are all three of them ever helpless. Whereas like Wendy could never fly without Peter like holding her hand in the animated film. She can fly very well on her own, and at some point she outflies Peter. She is willing to fight and stand up for herself. Tiger Lily has her community. She watches over these boys. She's the wisdom and the spirit, I think, of Neverland. She's its keeper. And Tinkerbell, at the end, when you can finally hear her speak, and the fact that Wendy now can hear her, that I thought was just so great to me, that because she mentioned, she's like, sometimes I don't think Peter hears me either. But that mutual respect between the three of them, that they can hear Tinkerbell, and Tinkerbell has a voice, and she has a lot more power than just flying. Like, we see her move things. Pixie dust is a lot more powerful in this Neverland compared to the book or the animated. So I absolutely loved them, and we'll talk more about Tiger Lily's representation.
Yeah, I'd agree. It was one of the more positive elements of my experience in watching this, really bringing Wendy to the forefront and not in the ways that she's slighted, I feel, in the, like I said, poor Wendy in the animated film. There's no doubt that she is the protagonist of this story, with a great supporting cast of females alongside her.
I think they also do a better job with her with that urgency about that conflict of growing up. This is something I see a lot in adaptations. I'm going to tip my hand to the one I was going to extra resource, the 2003 Universal live action adaptation, and some other ones I've seen, where in the book, Wendy knows she has to grow up just because she sees things changing at home. But in here we get, like, she's going to be sent to boarding school. Like, there's a catalyst moment where she is facing growing up. And that urgency, I think, helps establish that better. Whereas, like, in the book, it's kind of vague of, like, you know that you grow up. Okay. And then in the Disney animated film, it's just the father's aggravated of hearing her tell stories. And she's like, you're getting your own room. It's time. Like, it's just this kind of arbitrary moment of it's time to grow up. And I think having that establishment, and I think gives it that urgency and makes that easier to have that conflict in Neverland, because we see that with Wendy, where she confronts Peter and she's like, Neverland, and she says it out loud a couple of times, like, Neverland's not what I thought it would be. So I think that change also, I think, helped put the theme a little bit more prominent to me in the story.
Yeah, I think that theme of growing up is very well done in this film. And you kind of mentioned this earlier, Emily, but in no other place is that done so well at the end. So at the end of the movie, Peter Pan is on the roof of the Darling house. Wendy climbs up to join him. They have this really touching, heartfelt moment where all of us were like, oh my gosh, growing up, wow. And but part of that scene is that you see on the chimney, Peter Pan had written his name on the chimney. I don't remember if it's outrightly said or if it's assumed because he used to live in the house. So if that was Peter's home, do you think Mrs. Darling knew the story because she is a relative of Peter Pan's of some sort?
I want to believe she was. And that's just because I am a sucker for Peter Pan's one of my favorite fairy tale retellings. We talked about Book of the Month. When Darling Girl came out, I was like, well, I know exactly what book I'm picking, because if it's a Peter Pan retelling, I'm going to read it. So part of me I want to believe that because, and that was not abnormal. And in the original book, when we talk about this ending, Wendy is living in the house she grew up in. It's not uncommon that a house stays in a family. Even in my family, my grandparents' homes are still owned by my family. So I want to believe that the Darling family, even if it's now the Darlings, that would now be her married name, not her maiden name, that Peter is someone who kept coming and revisiting, or they at least saw him out the window, or mourned when he went missing, and had to come up with something to believe something nice. I want to believe it. I think it's a plausible, what do you call that theory? Plausible theory.
I want to believe it too. I did find that it was somewhat evocative of the original text ending, not necessarily in the same way, but maybe along similar lines. We didn't talk about this yet, but when the book ends, Peter, we have said, is forgetful. He's supposed to come every spring cleaning time to bring Wendy for a week, but he goes a long time. Wendy has grown old, and so he takes her daughter to Neverland. Then it goes on to say, her daughter's daughter, and I believe even her daughter's daughter's daughter, and so on. And the implication is that Peter will return to this home and continue to take the Darling descendants off to Neverland. So while that's not identical to how that pans out, I do like the idea of there being a connection to this home and Peter Pan.
Yes, I definitely, that last scene, the Mrs. Darling kind of has a look about her. I thought that meant she had also gone to Neverland with Peter Pan. That is how I took that scene. So, yeah, so still a connection. Still that Peter keeps coming back to this house because long ago this is where he lived. But to me, it was less that, and maybe they are all descendants. I mean, Peter obviously never had children, but some sort of relatives of some sort. But I just kind of liked the idea, especially with the end of the book where Peter comes to get Wendy's daughter, Jane, that it's this constant reoccurring event where Peter will always come to this house to get the children and take them on this adventure.
See, and that's why I cried at the end, because I thought that sentiment was just so well done, and you could see that conflict in Wendy. Amazing young actress. I thought she played that conflict at the end so well, of trying to convince Peter to stay, which we see in the book as well. She tries to convince Peter to stay, and they both have to face that conflict of who they really are or what their greater motivations will be, and that they can't. So as much as they want to be friends and they want to stay in each other's lives, they know that they can't. And the way they acted that out, that's what got me at the end, was so well done to me. So we want to go back to Tiger Lily, because we've hinted or touched on this subject a little bit before, and this is something so prominent as we're revisiting media and representation, and confronting white privilege, etc., in our 21st century. So both Barrie and Disney's Peter Pan have offensive language and racist descriptions of Indigenous people. How do you think this film, with the caveat, again, we are all white people talking about this, how did you see this difference, though, in depictions approaching Tiger Lily and her culture?
I feel right off the bat they set the right tone by having her speak an Indigenous language. I don't know if, because I watch movies with subtitles, if this was in the subtitles itself saying that she was speaking Cree, or if that was in the subtitles that would have translated what she was saying. But to have her speak in an authentic Indigenous language at first, then it turns out she also does speak English, but I feel she goes in and out of that language brought immediate authenticity to the character.
Yes, I mean, like Emily said, as a white person, I do not 100% know what an accurate approach would be, but I did feel, like you said, Courtney, the second she's on the screen, it feels different. This is a character who is, she has her own autonomy. Her character is not just being what, and I'm saying Indian because that is what the book and the 1953 movie called them, but in this film, they are a nation. And I think Emily said this when we were watching it. It feels like Neverland is their land, and then the pirates and Peter have just come to it. And so it is this community that has established this land, has established this home. And you see Tiger Lily, and she is so cool, and she's so strong, so smart. And that is what you notice about her, not that she is, I don't know, an indigenous community. You notice that she is a strong woman. That is the priority of her character. And I think that it helps you to have that part of the book added to a film without running into the racist depictions that the 1953 film has.
So I did a little digging, and a lot of news sites did touch on this with the release of the film. This was the hot topic of how is Disney going to reflect Indigenous nations. So first off, Alyssa is an Indigenous actor. Well, that is well established. In the NPR article that I found, all of the costume work was done by First Nation peoples in Canada. So she's from First Nation in Canada, Cree. So they made all of their garments. So all of the construction of how they were depicted was made by the First Nation. The actress, Alyssa, she credited that she felt that she, at least in the interview that I read, that she felt very welcomed, and that Disney was very open to having her and her nation have a lot of control of what they looked like on screen, what they got to say. So that is good to see that that communication on behalf of Disney. Again, like we said, will we ever, as white women, know what a good, accurate representation of the right way to do this is? Maybe not. I don't know if we can ever completely rectify the injustice done to Indigenous peoples in the earlier tellings, because unfortunately these are still, unless this movie takes off and becomes the new staple of Peter Pan, we're still going to have those stereotypes be part of the mass media, because we're still going to keep watching the 1953 animated film. We're still going to keep reading the original text. So I don't know if we could ever completely do it justice, but I was just that feeling, you said, that difference, I thought was really important. And I hope that we can continue to see growth moving forward like this and having these voices.
Yeah, I appreciate the discussion that I feel that the film has opened up on that front, also here among all of us. But as we wrap up our own discussion here, let's compare and contrast these two films a little more. Which of them do you feel best portrays Barrie's Peter Pan?
So I think when we're looking at Barrie's Peter Pan, it's the original animated film that best portrays it. The characters are more aligned to the characters in the book. The plot points follow along with how the book, I mean, things are different. You know, there's a poison cake in the book. There's a bomb that's intended to kill Peter in the movie, but there's still, those beats still hit the same. And both films do this. It's about growing up and what it is to be afraid to be an adult, and what it is to grow up well, grow up poorly, and how you go from that childhood into adulthood phase without losing that spark.
I agree that I think the animated film is the most accurate portrayal of Peter, though I do want to give a little credit to the new Peter. Well, he's very different in the sense that he has a character arc. I do think they bring some of the violent nature of Peter back. There's a lot more on screen. Like, he fights pirates to the death. I think some of that aspects of Peter, his ruggedness is back that we didn't quite get fully in the animated film. But the overall character, I think the animated film is more true to Barrie.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. If we're just looking at the plot overall, it's hitting more of the beats, and I feel that this more recent iteration takes the characters that are familiar and puts it through a 2023 lens. But it was great to visit both of them.
Yeah, and when thinking about both of them, maybe this is an unfair question, but which one did you like better?
Uh, it is tough because I think the strengths of the new one are incredibly strong, particularly with their portrayal of the female characters. I think that is what's going to make me really like the new film, but I still think the nostalgia and staying power of the animated is what, quote, makes it better. I think just because of that imaginativeness is, I think, a little stronger from the animated film versus the really hard-hitting emotional theme that it's pushed in the new film.
Y'all have convinced me to give the live action another
We did it, Leeann.
chance. You did it. But gut reaction right now would be the animated, just for the nostalgia value.
I think I would say animated too, but mostly because from a story perspective, I think the story is better crafted in the animated film. It has better flow, better character development, although maybe that's a hot take. I do think I like the characters of Wendy, Tinkerbell, and Tiger Lily much better in this newer film. But when I'm considering an overall, how do you tell a good story? How do you take this book and convert it into a captivating, interesting film? The animated film is still better at that.
So moving to that, the last difference I want to talk about is the ending. All three have different endings. In the original play, we get the epilogue chapter that I mentioned that was performed one night in 1908, the When Wendy Grew Up chapter, which we got in the book. In the animated film, the children go home. The Lost Boys do not stay with the Darlings. That was a difference. And we wave Peter off into the night sky. And then in the new live action, he still goes back to Neverland. The Lost Boys still don't, I don't think they stayed. But we get all that whole emotional backstory of Peter. What do you think the When Wendy Grew Up chapter, though, does? That is what moves us fast forward. So what do you think about that ending to the original story compared to the films?
I personally liked that ending best. I liked what I already shared regarding the generational continuation of the Peter Pan myth within Wendy's family, but also, as you shared, that the Lost Boys stay and they get to grow up and become parts of London society. And I feel like that was a nice juxtaposition with the idea of childhood and then what it means to grow up, because we kind of get a where are they now of each of the Lost Boys, and that was very enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I think that epilogue helps to wrap things up nicely. I don't think that you lose that, especially in the newer movie, because that scene between Wendy and Peter does the same thing for me. But you have that, Wendy does grow up, and this is who she becomes when she grows up. There's a really beautiful moment for me in the newer film when Wendy is thinking happy thoughts and she thinks ahead. She thinks forward into all of the things she will experience and the person she will become. And I think that is true to what the epilogue in the book does. I think it's a good reminder of it is okay to grow up, and you can grow up well.
I don't know if this is what Barrie intended, but I think this is the chapter of why Peter Pan is still a beloved story and what makes it mythical, because of that cyclic. Because we can now imagine or accept and believe that Peter keeps coming back, at least to that spot in London. He keeps coming back to our world every year every whatever, when he remembers, for a child. And I think that's what gives the story staying power, and that imagination that we can still believe that Peter is still coming from Neverland to bring adventure and childhood to children, even in 2023, because that's what his story has told us, that he keeps doing that. While we grow up, a new generation of children get to experience him. And I think that's what gives the story staying power. I don't know if it would be the same if that chapter didn't exist.
Yeah, it illustrates fully the timelessness of the story. And as we've shared here today, there are often adaptations and spin-offs of Peter Pan and its themes. What do you feel makes a Peter Pan story a Peter Pan story?
There's so many ways to answer this, but I think for me, the main things is that Peter Pan is a character in the story. You have this child who will never grow up, but then also that a Peter Pan story is about growing up, because you have that central character who is forever a child. It has to be about, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a child forever? And what does it mean to not be a child forever and to grow up?
I agree. I think in its simplicity, it can, to me, be considered a Peter Pan story as long as you have that conflict of having to face growing up, or any sort of change. Maybe it's not growing up, but some sort of life change. That conflict of wanting to stay the same, but accepting change. And I think you do need to have that mythical character, like you said, Leeann. Like, without that character, it's just a coming of age story. So to make it a Peter Pan, you need some sort of magic and mythical being. Like, he is the person who doesn't change. So as long as those are there, I think all those other details can be different and still be considered Peter Pan to me.
And they will continue to be there for generations to come. I'd like to close us out by listing, as we often do, some additional resources for our listeners to check out. I did tip my hand and reveal mine already, but mine is the 1960s televised musical version where Peter Pan is portrayed by Mary Martin. This is one that my grandma had on VHS, so I would routinely watch it when I visited her in Florida. I think I watched that and Fantasia for some reason. Were always my two picks. I'm at grandma's house, and we're going to watch those VHSs. Of course, that is now an outdated medium, but this is readily available on multiple accounts on YouTube if you want to check it out. To see the musical take, I would call this probably the most iconic. It's been done televised with Kathy Rigsby, as well as Allison Williams in the NBC The Show Must Go On live adaptation, but to me, this is the quintessential one. Certainly, as we have talked about in this podcast quite a few times, some parts do not age well, but if you want to see a stage version, this is a fun one to visit.
I agree with Courtney that any musical version of Peter Pan is worth getting a hold of. It is another great interpretation of the source material. My resources, so we mentioned Finding Neverland. That film is a great way to, it's fictionalized, but it's a great way to see like how Barrie developed this book and how different aspects of his life were incorporated into creating the play, where that story came from. I also think it's worth reading the chapters from The Little White Bird that became Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens. And then, if you can, if you're extraordinarily lucky, like some of us are, to see the Peter Pan statue in the actual Kensington Gardens. That statue is actually placed at the point in the book where Peter arrives in Kensington Gardens as a baby. But it gives you, it's not a backstory because Barrie does change parts about Peter, but it gives you a sense to how Peter Pan became this mythical character in Neverland that is some interesting background.
Finding Neverland's another one that makes me cry. I tipped my hand earlier as well, but I always loved the 2003 Universal Pictures live action film Peter Pan, starring Jeremy Sumpter as Peter Pan and Jason Isaacs as Captain Hook. Live action film wise, I think that is the most accurate to the original source material, even verbatim down to some of the dialogue out of that one. And I also was just in preteen love with Jeremy Sumpter at the time, so loved that film. But I highly recommend, if you're looking to compare two live actions, maybe one that is more closer to the book, I would go to that one. And then I did also want to give a shout out to some recommendations. If you go back to our episode of Book in the Mouse Club, episode 36, we had an interview with Margaret Carey about her book, Tinkerbell Talks. She was the actress model for Mark Davis for Tinkerbell, and talked about her experience in making the film. And also a shout out to a previous guest of our podcast, author Ridley Pearson. He wrote a prequel story to Peter Pan called Peter and the Starcatcher, So one of those spin-offs that everyone has a great imagination with Peter Pan. So if you're looking for a spin-off, that might be a great one to try, especially if you love Kingdom Keepers.
Great recommendations all around. And this is just the start of our summer series. So I wanted to share, as we continue our British invasion, we will be bringing you The Wind in the Willows in June, Alice in Wonderland in July, and Oliver Twist in August. So stay tuned to our social channels for guest reader announcements and episode release dates. You can keep up with us that way at Book of the Mouse on both Twitter and Instagram. And of course, email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. Please be sure to leave us a review on iTunes so others can find our podcast and read and listen along with us. If you'd like to keep up with me on Instagram, I am at Great Guthsby, and on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can follow me, Emily, on Instagram and Twitter at Emily_McD.
Wonderful. And thank you again, Leeann, for joining us today. As our guest of honor, you have the honors of closing us out with a quote. So what have you selected for us?
Yeah, so first, thank you guys so much for having me back on the show. This was so much fun. I think I could talk Peter Pan all day long now. But to close us out, I've selected two quotes that I think pair well together. The first one is from the book, and then the second one is from the most recent film, Peter Pan and Wendy. So the book, the quote is, "To die will be an awfully big adventure," spoken by Peter. And then from the movie, Wendy says, "After all this, I think that to grow up, why, it might just be the biggest adventure of all."
I really like the juxtaposition that you provided there. So excellent choice. And thank you again for joining us on our adventure today.
Thank you for having me.
Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.